Greetings, everyone. It is good to see you all on today. Today, I'm going to be sharing my action research project titled "The Right Family is the Best Medicine," identifying characteristics for adoptive parents, guardians who can successfully parent older youth. It's a little bit about me. I am a child-specific recruiter with the Department of Children and Families Adoption of Operations in New Jersey. I have a total of 18 years child welfare experience and 13 years of experience in the role of child-specific recruitment. What is child-specific recruitment? Child-specific recruitment is the development of an individualized plan for youth with an adoption goal, but without an identified adoptive family. This plan is based on the youth's background as well as their voice and vision for their permanent families. Child-specific recruiters employ intense child-focused recruitment techniques to bring about favorable permanency outcomes for our waiting children. In 2007, New Jersey adopted the child-specific recruitment model and created its first child-specific recruitment unit. At that time, the focus of our work was to address recruitment efforts for New Jersey's 100 longest waiting teens. Our work has evolved since that time, and we're available to support all our legally free children in our state. Child-specific recruiters support the adoption goal by providing guidance on strategic recruitment planning, teaming through the adoption journey, developing creative matching events, engaging families, and forging meaningful relationships with our youth to prepare them for adoption. And represented here are some of the events that we have done here in New Jersey. While the majority of our youth achieve legal permanency through KLG and adoption with their current resource family, both kin and unrelated, there's a small population of youth that do not have a permanent caregiver identified and committed to that youth. This is a population that our child-specific recruitment program works with, and we call them our select home youth. Just a snapshot of the waiting population in New Jersey. In 2020, New Jersey had 742 older youth adolescent in placement. 154 of those youth had a goal of adoption. And we saw that 42 youth in placement achieved permanency through KLG legal guardianship, and 38 achieved permanency via adoption. I can tell you from firsthand experience that we celebrate those youth and family who have achieved permanency because we know the work and effort it took to achieve those permanency outcomes. We hope that our youth will thrive in their families, but as we continue the work to achieve permanency for others, we desire to do so with more strategic efforts. As such, the purpose of my ARP, Journey to MPLD. My action research project explored successful permanent placement outcomes for older children. The targeted populations were licensed New Jersey families who adopted an older youth and were 2+ year post-adoption. Our goal was to identify factors that support successful placement outcomes for older youth. From the research, we developed an adolescent placement assessment tool to help staff assess and support pre-adoption placement for older youth. Before we got into it, we had to look at the research, and we learned from the research that there's a shift in brain development from preteen to teen, and young people in foster care are also managing developmental challenges with trauma. Knowing what we know about our child development and trauma faced by all youth in foster care, but specifically for this population that my ARP is focused on, we must be diligent in our placement efforts. Every effort should be made to ensure stable permanence for older youth is achieved, especially knowing the impact that disruption can have on a child. We know our youth challenges, but we could be more intentional on how we assess our families. Here we see a slide of a beautiful family represented with an older youth. We often identify our youth in child welfare as resilient. We are witnesses to what they have endured. We champion them to overcome. However, we know that youth fare better when they have safe, stable, and committed families, adults in their lives. We should seek families who are as resilient as our youth. Our families' efforts should match our youth's resilience. What can we do? we can take a more proactive approach to assessing families who are willing to care for our children. And that brings us to the question for my PICO. If licensed families who expressed an interest in adopting older youth, ages 13 to 18, with a goal of adoption, receive specialized assessment for matching and strategic placement, will it result in increased knowledge and placement stability for those youth? We started with our literature review. We conducted a parent assessment survey of successful adoptive families of older youth from New Jersey with the following criteria: finalized adoption of an older youth ages 13 to 18. Families were 2 or more year post-finalization. Youth is still residing with the family and receiving adoption subsidy. We developed the assessment placement tool. We conducted our an intro training session with adoption staff, support staff specifically, which were recruiters like myself, exchange specialists, workers that work within the adoption department, adoption field support staff. We then received feedback on the usage, application, and guidance of the tool. We learned from the research that the following factors support successful placement outcomes for families. Commitment being one of them. And what commitment looks like for those families: they are accepting of youth challenges. Families are willing to work through problems and balancing the negative and the positive. We wanted to, commitment shows for our families when they are standing through the challenges that they are experiencing when the older youth is placed in their home. The second identified factors that support successful placement for older youth is supports, right? Seeking counseling before and during. So when families are looking for counseling to help them address what the commitment they're making, as well as addressing, learning about what behaviors that children are bringing into the home. Parents, again, families who participate in support groups with other families, that allows for families to be informed, right, from other people's experience about the placement process of an older youth. And also seeking mentorship for others from other adoptive families, again, surrounding themselves with a community of people who can help support them and help them to understand what's happening when a child, an older youth, is placed in their home, and the trauma that older youth may have come to the home with, and the behaviors reflected through those traumas. The third factor that was identified from the research: families who invest in learning about our children. So information, and families willing to seek out information and invest in learning about older youth issues. And a family's willingness to understand the impact placement can have on a family. Again, families sometimes come to the adoption journey with, if I just love them, if we just give our children love, the kids that are coming into our home love, everything is going to be all right. But families who have an understanding of what the impact that's going to have on their family gives them an opportunity to fare better through the placement journey and the adoption journey. And additionally, information, families seeking resources and providing education that provide education on older youth adoption. What we know is that there's a time that we're going to be gone from this placement. In New Jersey, our placement supervision time is about six months, right? And if all goes well, we're moving towards finalization. So we're going to be gone. So we wanted to know, families need to know what is available to them to continue to support their placement. Additionally, we looked at the factors that supported successful placement outcomes for our older youth, for our adolescent population. We learned that the following factors: commitment, youth being committed to working through problems with adoptive family and recognizing the family's information being another one, youth being informed about the prospective families, using visits to assess the family, identifying common interests, and moving through the process in a timely manner supported the factor of successful placement outcomes, and also benefits, right? Our youth understanding and acknowledging the benefits of adoption, having stability, having family, and having support. What we did with this information. With this information, we developed the youth survey with the intent to gather insights on helpful support services, placement preparation, how youth fostered relationship with adoptive families, and how they received information about the process. Adoptive parents were asked to support the youth in completing the survey. We did not receive survey responses from our youth, and I attribute the lack of responses to the method that we use. Maybe a group engagement would have been more favorable to engage our youth and to facilitate the process in getting the information that we were looking for. Although we received no youth responses from the survey, we gathered from the following thoughts from families who completed the survey. One family reported, "I see the transformation in my son. He's changing in a positive way." Another family shared, "He's responsible, more caring. Most of all, he says that he feels like he's part of the family." One family reflected that in all cases, in all the cases of where they adopted a child a youth from our care, the kids are doing great and are very involved with the entire family. The information shows that families who have successfully adopted are expressing that their youth are doing well in the environment, in their placement home. Honestly, further efforts will be made to gather feedback from New Jersey's older youth who have achieved successful placement outcomes. And the information is certainly needed to help us plan better with our youth and for placement. So with the research information, what we also did was we went ahead and developed a parent youth assessment survey. And the family survey was developed with the intent to gather insight on families' knowledge about parenting older youth, the resources and support services that worked for the family. Also, what our agency could do better. Resources available after finalization and utilization of those community resources, and the knowledge of youth and youth behavior and social culture. I'm just going to share a couple of what we received from the families survey. So we asked families if they thought that their adoption placement finalization was successful, and the answer was yes. But it wasn't successful without some challenges, right? And we see here that family expressed what caused their adoption to be successful. The only reason it was successful, we had one family say, is that I was committed to sticking it out. If you see that word committed is showing up in the conversation from our New Jersey surveyed families, which supports the information that we received from the research. Another family expressed, "My adopted son loves our family. He has flourished with us, developing his interest, passion, becoming more self-confident, and feeling supported." Again, when we look at the youth and the youth information from the research, we see that being a part of a family, stability is being reflected here in this family's expression of their successful placement. And another family expressed, "Although we have been through a lot, we stood strong as a family and worked through it." We continue to see the reflection of what the research says. We wanted to again know from families about the services that they use beyond what our agency provided, right? And we see from families that they expressed using therapists. They also expressed using an adoption counselor. And one family shared it would have been helpful to have an adoptive parents to connect with. I don't recall that being offered to us. Again, a reflection of how important it could be to have a mentorship partnership with other adoptive families. Online parenting groups was shared, and Nurtured Heart training was also shared. And here in New Jersey, Nurtured Heart training was offered to a group of our families. I want to say maybe it was a couple of years ago. And for specifically, one family, the family expressed parenting support groups specific to parents who have adopted Black children. So we see that families reached out for services beyond what was offered by our agency. We wanted to know from families if they got enough information prior to the placement. And the overwhelming answer was no. And we wanted to know more about that. What we learned from our family about what would have been more beneficial to them in terms of information in planning their placement to help them plan through their placement journey. Families expressed that they would have been grateful, or it would have been helpful, sorry, for our agency to provide more information around the behavioral challenges that the child in their home, being placed in their home, would go through. Additionally, it would have been helpful to have known more accurate version of the behaviors we would face. So again, in terms of information, we're learning from our families through this survey and through their responses that our agency can do better in sharing information on giving information about the behavior challenges families will experience. We do provide a full disclosure information in our in supervisory meetings with our families, and we're there with them through the journey initially. But I think families would benefit from just a more accurate picture of what the behaviors look like. And so that's something for us here in New Jersey to consider. We also asked what service supports or resources would have been helpful in preparing you for the journey of parenting an older youth. Families expressed to us that training for adolescent adoption would have been helpful. They wanted to learn more information about mental health, which would support their request about learning more about our older youth behaviors and challenges. It would also have been helpful to know more about the transition to our family, what the transition to our family could be like. Again, going back to the research information and families learning about the impact that placement can have on their child, on their families, sorry. So did you know? Today's child welfare systems generally use assessment and service delivery approaches that have been developed for very young or school-age children. These approaches are typically applied to all young people in foster care, including teens and young adults whose developmental status and needs are substantially different. We're finding that we may be in child welfare using a one-size-fits-all assessment of how we are placing our children. The adolescent placement tool is the outcome of my AR pick. We developed the assessment tool to guide the placement process of older youth, adolescents. This adolescent placement tool is intended to assess a family's readiness and older youth preparedness for a placement. So the overall goal of the tool is really just to assess families' readiness through the identified factors that we gathered from the research: commitment, support, and information. And the tool also helps us in preparing our youth with their understanding of commitment, their understanding of the information they're receiving through the process, and what benefits they will gain from being adopted into a family. This slide represents an example of what the placement assessment tool looks like. Staff is guided to assess families on their knowledge of commitment, knowledge of support, knowledge of information of older youth. They are guided by a set of questions to help evaluate the presence of each factor. The assessment is not intended to rule families out, but to assess strengths and needs of families to better prepare and support an older youth being placed in their home. The goal here of the assessment tool is that staff will have an opportunity to sit and assess a families based on their strengths, based on the research information that we have about the factors that support successful placement outcomes for older youth. We're not looking to rule families out, but we're looking to be sure that we are doing our due diligence in educating family for the commitment that they're making. The next slide represents the youth assessment tool. So as we're assessing our families, we're assessing our youth, and we're again assessing them for preparedness. Youth assessment offers a guide to staff in preparing and including the youth's voice in the placement process. Staff is seeking to understand the youth's mindset around the placement, adoption, and forging relationship with the adoptive family to move forward successfully. As adults, we desire to protect children and oftentimes leave them out of what we identified as adult conversations. However, it is important for us to ensure that youth, older youth, adolescents are prepared for the adoption placement and their voices are included in the process. And so the assessment tool for our youth really guides staff through a series of questions to see how the youth is feeling about this process so that we get a sense of what information we need to provide to our youth in moving them through the placement process successfully. So in order to decide whether or not I've been saying since I started this process, am I crazy? You know, because I think I'm crazy when I think about some of the work that I do and some of the thoughts that I have around child welfare and better serving our children and families. And so I sat with a group of my colleagues, our 10 adoption support staff, and discussed with them the reason for the assessment tool and the purpose and how it should be used. And they offered me their feedback in that initial conversation. They expressed the tool helped me to recognize my youth's challenges during the placement process. Sometimes what happens for me is that so much of my focus is on getting my youth in a stable environment, and I sometimes forget to check in with them. And so with this tool, it kind of guides us to make sure that we're checking in with them on the important things, right? And it's also allowing us to see where their deficits are, what they don't really understand. Because we just sometimes assume we're going to get you into a family, we want you to thrive, we want you to have permanency, have your forever home, right? But we sometimes have to recognize what our youth need in order to do that successfully. So the tool allows us to do that. Some suggest that that the tool can be used for staff to regroup after supervisory meetings. So what we do after we have initially selected a family is that we have a supervisory full disclosure meeting with our families. And so after that, I think we need to sit down, right? And with this tool, it guides us to be able to have that conversation. Furthermore, we had a few of our child-specific recruiters to use the tool and to give us their feedback. They shared that 83% shared that the tool was easy to read and understand. They suggested that it had great range of questions, breaking down the important into important sections. One recruiter shared the assessment tool asks the right questions. Many times when it comes to placing a youth, we sometimes don't always think outside the box and get the foundation of why this youth in this placement. We also wanted to know from our staff, to what extent do you feel the assessment tool helped in evaluating families' readiness? And to great extent, the staff agreed that it helped to assess the family's readiness. One of the feedback we received is the assessment tool helped with feedback in reference to exploring appropriate needed questions for the family and assessing their capabilities to parenting an adolescent. Are they really ready to take on such a youth with special behaviors? We also wanted to learn if the form was helpful in helping guiding staff on their feedback to the adoption team as a whole, because we don't do this by ourselves, right? We work with a team, and we want to make sure that in using this tool, we can come back to the table and accurately express what we're feeling about this particular placement. And so to a great extent, the staff agreed that the tool is helpful in guiding their conversation with their fellow colleagues around the placement and readiness of a family to take on an older youth. Overall, it is important for child welfare agencies to use the right tool to assess placement needs for older youth. Our older youth have different developmental, emotional, and physical needs than younger children. Assessing placement for older youth with trauma will require our diligence. This is just a clip of what's possible for all our children.
I've got something really touching for you guys. You're going to love this one. Tens of thousands of kids age out of foster care without finding their forever home. But one young man is proving it's never too late for family.
All I know is she'll always be there for me.
A normal school day in Beaumont, Texas changed Benny and Anthony's lives forever. Once teacher and student.
He was an ideal student, a model student. Now
officially a mother and son.
Not many kids my age get adopted nowadays.
It's a big commitment, a decision Benny is confident of.
I have a son. I'm more than elated. I have a son for the rest of my life.
The 16-year-old had decided he didn't want to be adopted.
Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you might get.
Until he met his English teacher last November, Benny Berry. After the adoption ceremony, the two explained how it happened. Anthony asked if Benny would be his mom in January, and she decided to make a deal.
Finish your assignment, and then you can show me the website. Then later, I found out that it was really an option to adopt him, so we pushed forward.
Anthony, who was in foster care since he was 9 years old, was skeptical at first.
I was like, oh yeah, she just saying it.
Now overcome with emotion after thinking this day might never come.
I really couldn't sleep last night. I told moms, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to sleep. She was like, I don't think I am either.
With one thing left to say.
I love you, Anthony.
I love you too, Mama.
And this is Benny's first time.
Thank you. Before I move on to, I've been around in child welfare for a long time, and I didn't know I was gonna get teary-eyed. And I've been working in child-specific recruitment for a long time, and I have been on the person looking in on Benny and Anthony's story, and recognizing the possibility of it. But it goes deeper. It goes to us finding the right family to commit to our children. And the role of us showing up and doing our very, very best job to assessing those placements. Let's talk a little bit about the impact before we go on to our next step. So I came to this journey very hesitantly because, like many of my fellows, I don't do research. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know if I'm going to be good at it, right? Arlene, I will say that I have imposter syndrome. I didn't know if I was going to show up today. No, I'm just playing, Arlene. I was coming. And so what this has done for me personally and professionally, it has helped me to confidently express my ideas in any forum. And I've come to the conclusion that I'm not crazy. I have a better understanding of the value of research in developing child welfare policies. Thank you, Cheryl Lynn. Research, research, research. She made me nervous initially, guys. Like, I'm not sending her my email. I'm going to send them to Arlene. And I'm inspired to keep going on my child welfare journey. When you have been in a particular field for some time, you can lose your momentum. But if you are lucky, something may come along to reignite your passion and motivation for the work. MPLD came along when I needed a second wind. And I leave the MPLD fellowship with strength for the journey. Wherever I go in child welfare, the MPLD have given me that second wind. A few years ago, I did a presentation about teaming through the adoption journey, and this quote stood out to me. It says, adoption is the most intentional process on earth. I accept that the decision to adopt is purposeful and deliberate. Families do not come to this decision lightly. Therefore, we owe the same intention in planning and achieving favorable placement outcomes for our children. And that's my pledge that I'm making today. Next steps. I plan to continue piloting with adoption staff. So as every opportunity I get, I'll be sharing what I learned from the research, the important factors that we need to be paying attention to when we're assessing homes. I had the opportunity to do that yesterday when I had to use my own assessment tool to evaluate 4 families for placement. And let me tell you what happened. I read the home studies and I had the family in mind that I had in mind. But when I used my assessment tool, it says that this family had more skill set. This other family had more skill set that we're looking for to parent this child, right? And so I said to a friend of mine, I think I talked myself out of the family that I wanted for my kid with my own tool. And so I'll be continuing to share that with adoption staff. the value in the information that I receive. I'm sharing feedback on the data with additional support staff, with my adoption operations colleagues, right, who are continuing to communicate with families long beyond the finalization. That will be our subsidy unit. Create a list of resources specific to older youth adoption for families. So families, we learn from families that they need more information. So what resource can we provide to help them better understand the older youth adoption, and develop a network of families who have adopted older youth that can serve as support to each other and mentor new families. I also, when I was doing the surveys, I spoke with families who said, I would love to be able to talk about my adoption journey. And so hopefully we'll be able to bring those families to the table to be mentors for our newer families who are coming on to this journey. I do nothing by myself. And these are just some of the great folks, some of our team members at Adoption Operations who support the work that we do around child-specific recruitment. And just some of the, as you can see us up there in the blue, that night we hosted a game night for our kids and families who are interested in adoption. And so alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. And we've been able to do much in New Jersey around adoption for older youth.